Hey, mushroom lovers. I am here with Jordan Jent from Texas Fungus. And Jordan is the chief mycologist there. And you and Adam have been growing mushrooms almost like 2 years. You started commercially more like 2 years ago. You've been growing them for much longer than that, correct?
Correct, yes.
So give us a little bit of your background and your history. What got you into mushrooms?
Really, I had always wanted to be a farmer. But I couldn't grow any kind of field crops whatsoever. My black diamond watermelons looked like honeydews. All my herbs were terrible, and I killed cacti. So I decided, how does a mushroom grow? And I just went down the YouTube rabbit hole, and 8 hours later, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do.
Okay.
So, I got into mushroom growing. That was back in 2016, 2017, and just been rocking and rolling ever since.
So do you have a favorite mushroom?
Maitake, the woods, yeah.
Okay, yes, and actually we've tried some of those. Tim, one of our other presenters, who's actually doing a log demonstration, gave me some to try, and they were delicious. They were very tasty.
Yeah, it's my favorite one to grow, favorite one to eat, but there's so little information out there about how to grow it very well. So there's a lot of R&D.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So if someone's getting started with the mushrooms, what do you say the first thing they can do? Should they try a grow kit on their counter, or talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's certainly the easiest way. Whenever I first started, I grew off of logs, and I did, a whole bunch of shiitake, some oyster, but it takes about a year to 2 years for those logs to colonize. So if you're looking to, grow some mushrooms, see how they expand really fast, yeah, grow kit is an awesome way to get started.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're going to talk today all about the lab process. You're going to talk about how you do the plates and kind of transfer things over. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? We'll dive right into the slides.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
All right. So, and first, Jordan, kind of describe the process that we're going to go through here. Why do people do this as part of the mushroom process?
So this is the whole purpose of doing any kind of work with agar or with petri dishes is to propagate out, mycelium, so that, you can take from one petri dish and then grow thousands of pounds off of it. That's the ultimate goal, right? And to do it very cleanly. And first off, one thing I will say, you kind of see the beginning result, but you didn't see the process where I spent, an hour and a half cleaning down the lab. That's very, very important, right? I always tell anybody getting into mushroom growing, half of mushroom growing is cleaning. So you better get used to it and suck it up, buttercup. So you may spend only, like today, pouring these agar plates. I spent 5 minutes pouring those, and that's it. And I'll spend a little bit more time later wrapping them up with Parafilm, but I spent an hour and a half cleaning the lab first. Wow. So you always got to make sure your lab is pristine. You want to be able to go in there and be able to say that this is just as clean, if not cleaner, than a doctor's office. So,
okay. So doctors.
Yeah, that level of clean.
Okay.
So using agar plates and expanding the mycelium out, you get to see the mycelium run in certain ways. You may be able to pick out different strains from a particular species, certain characteristics, certain genetics of it, that you'll be able to look under a microscope and then take a look at and see how it behaves, right? Mm-hmm. So that's what you really want to see, is how it behaves on certain media. So because it's always a good tip every now and then to change over from, malt extract to potato dextrose. That's never a bad idea. So that's what, if you're ever going to do any kind of lab work, that will eventually begin the process of it, so that you can get started and, throw some of that agar into a grain bag, and then from a grain bag to a production bag.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So let's just walk through these pictures, and you talk to us about what we're looking at.
Yeah. So right here, what I did was pressure cooked that Erlenmeyer bottle right there. And, I got those on Amazon for 2 of them for $15. They're autoclavable. So you pressure cook your media for 30 minutes, at least I do, at 15 PSI. and then bring it out. So you can see me tipping it with a radar gun, or not radar gun, but a temp gun.
Yeah.
Because I like to pour the agar at about 120 to 130 degrees. Okay. And so at that temperature range, you tend to get a lot less moisture on the inside of the plates. So you don't want a whole lot of water building up, after they've cooled down, and then you go to wrap them.
Okay. Now you're sitting in front of a flow hood too. Talk to us about what that's doing.
Yeah. So basically your flow hood is trying to blow out as clean of air as possible. When it comes to mushroom growing, you want to give it the most perfect environment for growth. One way to help get around that, a still air box does work, but it's really not meant for a commercial operation. I've yet to see a commercial operation that still uses still air boxes. Yeah. So the flow hood, laminar flow is where you have, the same amount of CFM blowing all across the filter face, and it's blowing out, up to 99.99% HEPA air down to 0.3 microns.
Okay, so it's super clean air. There's nothing that can contaminate when you're pouring, basically, is what that's coming down.
So we hope. Yes, that's the goal.
Okay, so you're also wearing gloves. You sprayed down the area beforehand. And right here, it looks like you're cutting open your plates. Yeah,
so with the plates, they usually come in a sleeve. I buy them by the pack of 500. That's just the best deal if you plan on going through a lot of plates, which we do. So what I'll typically do is I'll actually turn it upside down because I'm going to pour into it. So I'm going to turn it upside down, spray the whole thing, very, very well with 70% isopropyl. Make sure it's nice and well coated on that. Kind of wipe it down a little bit. And then I'm going to cut it open with a sterile scalpel. And so I'm just going to cut open the bottom part, and then I'm going to take it and then flip it over.
Gotcha. Yeah. So here you're spraying it down, I think.
Right. Yeah. That was before that, spraying it down. And then, so here you can see me opening it. So go back one. Yeah. So right here is where I'm opening it. I'm making sure not to touch the inside of that bag, because within that they come sterile. So the plates themselves are sterile through gamma radiation. And so they'll take those plates, and then I want to start on that bottom one. And so I'm trying not to expose the entire stack to a potentially dirty area for as minimal amount of time as possible.
Gotcha. All right. So here you're opening up your material too.
Yeah. So I'm opening up, the agar media after I've cooked it. It's cooled down to a reasonable temperature. So opening it up here, getting ready to pour. And you notice that I'm keeping it as close to that filter face as possible. And I'm keeping my plates as close to it as well. I've already sanitized everything as much as I can, sanitize my hands. You can actually kind of see my hands are, still a little bit wet on that. There's some blackness or darkness to that black glove. And so spraying those all the way up my arms, as much as possible. And then I'm getting ready to pour. So we're opening it up here. And then with each one, let's see. Oh, that was opening the scalpel blade. And then, so that's an up close picture there. And then, so you open up the scalpel blade, cutting it open very slightly, making sure I don't touch, or the minimum amount as possible. Yeah. So now we're getting ready to pour. And so I'll typically swirl it around, and, you're pouring, some people like to do a really small pour, just enough to coat the bottom. I like to pour it kind of heavy just because agar media is fairly cheap because you're using anywhere between 1 to 25 grams of something. When you bought a whole pound of it, you got a long way to go to get through that. Okay. So I like just pour heavy. It's a lot easier to cut out as well. So here you're using one plate at a time. So I'm lifting up the whole stack. And so you can see the ones that I poured down below, those were already done. So I'm pouring into the new plate really, really quick, and then covering it back over with that same top. And then I'm just going to move that bag. You can see the bag is still connected, right? Yeah. So you want to make sure that, you see me starting at the bottom one there. So I just finished pouring that, and then I'm going to come back over the top and then pick the whole stack up again. Right. Yeah. That's it going in.
Okay.
And about every few ones, that's at the very end where, you're at the end of the bag for that sleeve. So you don't really need to hold that anymore. And then I'm just going to cover that up again.
Cover that back up with your lid, and then you'll be done. And then
I'll actually take the sleeve and put it back over right here.
Yes.
And so that way it can cool down in what was, a pretty sterile sleeve there. And then I actually like to use what's left of the agar as a weight. And so I've noticed that if you put a weight on the top, that's a pro tip. You take that, put that on the top, and that'll actually clamp the petri dishes down. And for some reason, it helps remove that moisture so you don't get a lot of water buildup on the inside of the plates.
Very, very cool. There's the lid on right on top. Keep the moisture out of there.
Yep. And then you just let it cool down. I typically let it cool down overnight. And then so one of the first things I do in the morning, come back in and then start wrapping all the plates.
Okay. When you say wrapping all the plates, what are you wrapping them with?
There's a product called Parafilm.
Okay.
So it's a stretchy kind of medical film used specifically for agar plates. But it stretches really well, but it's also a very breathable material. Because you can choke, the mycelium out. That's the thing I'm sure talking with, all the other growers is that you've probably learned that mushrooms actually inhale oxygen, exhale CO2 the same way that you and I do.
Okay. And so then when do you actually put the mycelium on the plate? Before you wrap them, or are you going to wait until you actually pull them out and use them?
Yeah. So I'll wait until, typically I do a lot of my lab work and a lot of spawn prep on Mondays. And so on Mondays, and whenever I'm going to be using, or basically Tuesdays, because I'll go and I'll make the spawn on Monday, cook it, and then let it cool down. And I'm going to inoculate it on Tuesday morning. And so then I'll use all of these plates by, within 5 days or so.
Okay. And so this is actually putting the mushroom mycelium on there.
Yeah. So this was a transfer that I did. It's from a brown oyster called Italian, or also known as Phoenix oyster. It has really nice kind of wavy caps. But you can see that this plate is very clear. So the whole purpose for that is using water agar. And so all this is 1,000 milliliters of water and 30 grams of agar. And the whole purpose for that is that you can then look at things and actually do strain isolation and to help clean up. Maybe one culture gets dirty from time to time. So I'll actually then transfer it back to water agar, look for, a much cleaner area of where it's growing, and then try to isolate that and then restart that process again in a much cleaner environment.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah. Water agar is actually highly underrated. A lot of people don't know how to use it or even what the real purpose of it is, but it can actually save, quite a few strains that you think might be super dirty. But, you go back to water agar, maybe 2 or 3 transfers.
Yeah.
And that also allows you, especially if you get a new strain in, you can actually see the speed at which that species or that strain of that species is growing at. Because it has no nutrient whatsoever.
Gotcha. So it's just growing super, super fast then.
Well, it has the potential to. Yeah. So if someone had told you this strain is super awesome, you say, great, well, I'm going to test it on something that has no nutrients whatsoever, and we'll see how fast it goes. Gotcha.
Okay. And when you say cleaning, so let's share with folks about cleaning a strain. Why would a strain need to be cleaned?
Well, because maybe you're looking at the individual fruits that are coming out of your grow room, and maybe the yield has gone down, or maybe they're doing some kind of weird mutation, or you're looking at how the spawn is running and you're tracking it on your logs. What you should be doing is, okay, instead of 10 or 12 days, it's taking more like 16 or 18. So that can be something that's happening. Or maybe the whole strain itself, you go to transfer that from agar to generation 1 spawn bag, or maybe to liquid culture, and it contaminates each and every time. And it's like, well, what the heck is going on with this? And so there's a few things you can do to help clean up a strain. Is that you can take it from, really clean part, like say from this plate that you're showing now, that one on the right. You may take the outer edge that looks like it's growing really, really nice, And then you transfer that part to water agar just to ensure that there's no other nutrients that it may pick up. But you'll then sector it off again from that water agar plate onto another, nutrient dense plate and see how that grows out and really compare the two.
Okay. All right. So we've got this right here. And then what's going on in this picture?
This is actually Grifola frondosa, mycelium, or hen of the woods.
Yep. Okay. So it's just a different strain. That's why it looks different.
Yeah. So not all mycelium is created equally, so to speak.
Okay. All right. So now we've got some grain spawn. Talk to us about this process.
Yeah. So this is what we call a G1 bag or generation 1. So this is where I took, a wedge of agar, from that petri dish, and I'll throw it in here whenever I'm making spawn. And then the hopes is some people do use generation 1 spawn bag for their production bags. But if you're really trying to get the most bang out of your buck, you can expand this out into, 10, more G2 bags, just like this. And at least for us, for what we use for G2, we use about 30 production bags out of that. So if you look at the actual cost of it, right? This bag, maybe you only use this because I only make 3-pound G1 bags. So that would be the equivalent of going into 15 production bags. Or I could take this same bag, put it into 10 6-pound G2 bags. And then from there, off of each of those, I can grow 300 production bags.
Gotcha. Okay, so this is how you expand it out. So let's kind of back the folks up for a second here. So the agar plates, you're going to take some mycelium onto those, drop it onto the plate. It's going to grow out. Then when it grows out, you could actually expand it into more plates if you wanted to.
Certainly.
Or you could just take right from that one and then go right into this one, which is a G1 bag.
Yeah, typically what I do is I'll actually do both at the same time. Okay. So I'll go from an agar wedge and I will cut out and I'll start maybe 2 more plates with that. And then what is left is what will go into a G1 bag.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's the mylar plate is how you keep the strain going in the lab constantly.
Right, exactly.
And how often do you have to go to a new plate?
Typically once a week.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, most of your plates should colonize in 7 to 10 days if it's say blue oyster or lion's mane, or any kind of if it's any kind of pleurotus or hericium strains, they're going to colonize in about 7, 8, 9 days. But some of your other ones say chestnut or piapino or even maitake, those are going to take a little bit longer, somewhere usually between the tune of 12 to 16 days.
Okay. And after they've colonized, they're going to start dying back, or you just need to get them onto a new plate to make so they stay clean. Yeah,
you need to make sure you get them onto, a new plate because you want to catch them while they're growing. You don't want them, because the more that mycelium expands out to the edge of that agar plate, well, the edge of the agar plate is where air is coming in. So it's growing closer and closer to a contamination source.
Okay, that makes sense. What temperature do you keep your plates at?
About low 70s.
Okay, so a little bit warmer.
65 to 70 is great, but normally I hang them around 72 Fahrenheit.
Okay. All right, so now in this one we've completely colonized.
Right, yeah, so this is actually a piapino strain, and you can see it actually growing out, and it's actually got down towards the bottom left right there. It's actually pinning on the grain right there. It's forming primordia, and it's getting ready to go.
Whoops, I don't have my mouse, unfortunately, or I'll point it out. But
all right.
Yes, I can see that right there. All right, so now here it's actually got mushrooms right in the bag.
Well, yeah, so this is actually a production bag. Okay. From king oyster. So we try to grow king trumpet as often as we can, but most people only grow it in the colder months because it's a mushroom that really loves cold temperature. And so, this is a production bag of the king trumpets, fruiting out and flushing.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah, and that's kind of like the top photo inside the bag of what's going on.
Okay, so for kings, you keep them in the bag while they're actually producing?
Yeah, because they love to top fruit.
Okay.
So where they'll just fruit right on top of the block, and that's actually really how they work best.
Okay.
And so typically kings like to have like higher CO2 in the beginning stages. So that's how they form those long stems and they get nice and elongated. And then I'll open up the top of the bag to let more fresh air in so that those caps can kind of form and then fan out just a little bit. And it creates a really nice, pretty looking mushroom.
Okay. Very cool. So these are bags that are getting ready to colonize, correct?
Yeah, so these were ones that we had done just yesterday. And so you can kind of see that they're just in the beginning stages, So we actually use like a bread labeler.
Yeah.
So we can just quickly go species by species. We just write the species, and we have, a number system for that. And then we have the date so that we know, okay, we can look at, 01/10/28. What was that? Well, that's blue oyster, and it was inoculated on 10/28.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. So then here we're looking at them that have started to colonize.
Right. Yeah. So this is kind of in the middle stage. They're getting ready, pretty close towards the finish line. I like them where they're like really nice and dense white. And so some people will just go ahead and send them right into their fruiting room at this stage, but I like to let them go just a little bit longer. I've noticed that once you let them, a couple more days in colonization, you'll actually get a much higher yield off of that. It's certainly worth it. And especially when you're looking at a whole set of, say, like 30 bags at a time, if you end up getting, a half a pound off of each individual bag, well, that's 15 pounds, that all you had to do was wait 2 more days in colonization for.
So that is fascinating, Jordan, that you don't want to rush this process, because what you're saying is you make sure they stay nice and long in colonization, that they're going to make a much better product and give you a lot more mushrooms.
Yeah. I mean, and usually most like oyster or except for king is in the oyster family. But oysters, as far as like, your blue, your elm, gold, Italian pinks, those shouldn't take more than 14 days.
Okay.
Your Hericium species, lion's mane, coral tooth, a lot of those shouldn't take more than 12. Ours are at the tune of about 10, sometimes 9. But that's just because, we're working on strains like crazy.
Okay. Now talk to me. When do you know that they've colonized? You've got white through the entire bag. What's the point that you say, all right, these are good?
Yeah, usually it's where we have a nice dense white going through the whole bag, and we're usually checking by the date as well. So typically we'll have, like, whenever we go, you can kind of see that piece of tape on there, on that rack. So we'll set that whole line of bags, and we'll say, okay, it was inoculated, say on November 1st. It should be ready by November 15th, and so, but we actually have kind of a 2-rack system, in where we will inoculate a set of bags, and those will be, just starting. And then the other set is basically on the finish line. Okay.
All right. Now let's talk through a little bit here about actually inoculating these bags. How does that process work? So you got the grain spawn, you're going to use that. So how do you get it into these bags?
Yeah. So you're going to be working in front of your laminar flow hood, 70% isopropyl in a spray bottle. You're going to be spraying everything down. You spray down your spawn bag. You break up your spawn to where you have individual grains. That way you can create a lot of inoculation points. Then at that point, you're going to take your production bags. You're going to open those up as close as you can to your flow hood. You open those up, but you want to make sure you never touch the inside of your spawn bag, and you never touch the inside of a production bag, because the human body is the strongest vector for contamination, right? Okay. And so typically what I'll do is I'll either use a sterile scalpel or flame sterilize it, with a benzomatic torch, right? And then I'll cut open the bag right in front of the flow hood, and then make sure it's broken up before you cut the bag. Always do that. That's a rookie mistake. But yeah, break up your spawn first, then cut it open. And then I like to just open a very small amount I cut open a very small hole of that bag, so that whenever I go to pour. And I don't like to use like a spoon or anything like that. Some people you do, and that's great and all, but it's not exactly for me. Just because I noticed whenever I stopped using a spoon to actually scoop grain out and into a bag, yes, it's probably a little bit more consistent rather than just pouring it and eyeballing it. But at that point, I know that I've never touched the grain myself.
Okay.
And so then you're going to pour each individual bag or a little bit, probably about a handful into, and we use 12-pound production blocks, which are, bigger than what most people use. So I'll pour individual, about a handful of grain into each bag, and then you're going to then kind of turn it on its side so that you can let in some of that clean air into the bag, and also inflate the bag a little bit, and then you're going to seal it with an impulse sealer. I like the double jaw ones. They are pricey, but they work really nice. And they create a nice big seal. But then that way you can disperse the grain by shaking the bag a little bit, or not a little bit, quite a bit, to make sure that your spawn is mixed all throughout the bag, and then it colonizes evenly.
Okay. So you want to spend that time to make sure that you're moving it around, getting the spawn to move all the way around the bag so it can easily colonize the whole thing.
Certainly.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Every day that ends in Y.
Okay. And you got some patches on these bags.
Yeah. Actually, all of our production bags and spawn bags have filter patches on them. We tend to make them, at least in our room, we say, hey, make all the bags in our colonization room face the east, so that whenever we go to take them down off of a rack, we can just cut a slit at the top and then fold that over, and then that's what gets fruited. These are actually some of our maitake bags, and that looks like it's on recipe G. So yeah, right now we're going through a lot of different trial and error on different recipes for maitake, and so typically we'll label these on the filter patch. So we'll write, because we use a completely different substrate mix than we do for oysters and lion's mane.
Okay.
And so I'm testing this one out to see how that specific substrate recipe works.
Okay. All right, and this is what success looks like.
Yeah. So this is the end product. So this is some of our golden oyster, and that's actually like there's no filter on that. It's just straight with my phone. I mean, they just get that yellow, and they're called golden oyster for a reason. And this strain is actually really nice and firm.
Okay.
Golden oyster kind of has the reputation of being really fragile and it'll break apart real easily. But this one I've actually managed to make sure that it has those same good genetics of a nice firm oyster mushroom that's not going to fall apart, once you go to even cook it or put it in, a case with other mushrooms. So, and these ones are actually pretty nice. We usually get off of these right about 2.5 to sometimes 3, but 2.5 to 2 3/4 per block. Okay.
So real nice yield.
Yeah, pretty nice. And then these are our Piapinos coming out. And those we actually harvested from today. And these are super nice, really nice and nutty flavor. It's kind of like an almond.
Okay.
Nice. But the cap and stem are all entirely edible. And so that's not something you need to throw away. But you got to pick them at the right time, or else the shelf life decreases by the second.
Okay.
They can turn to mush just like that.
Wow.
So, but they're really, really nice. They add a really great color and variation to a chef's mix case.
Yes.
So when you've got like 10 pounds that have like 8 or 9 different species in it, they really make the whole thing just pop.
Very cool.
And then these are a whole wall of blue oysters. So this is like 60 bags. You can see the ones on the left, just a little bit further down. We've already harvested from those, but these are new ones coming up, and they are looking like we did everything right. So really pleased to see those. Yeah.
And how many pounds we get off this type?
This species right here, I harvested some of them earlier, and I was getting anywhere between 2 3/4 to 3.5 pounds per block.
And that's on first flush.
Yeah, first flush for sure. So, I mean, Yeah, if you can get 90 pounds off of 30 blocks, yeah, you're that's nothing to complain about. That's for sure.
Yes, that's some beautiful, beautiful mushrooms.
Yeah, and these are our coral tooth. So these are coming in. They're in the same family as lion's mane, just a different species, or same genus as lion's mane. Sorry.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Hericium coralloides, a lot of the same health benefits as lion's mane, but they've got a much sweeter flavor.
Okay.
So not near as dense. So they got these kind of branched, teeth and like barbed wire branches with arms. So they're really cool. They cook up really awesome in the pan, get really golden brown, and super easy. A lot of people's kind of they're like, "What the heck is that?" It actually looks like coral. I'm like, "Oh, funny you mentioned that."
Yes.
Kind of its name. So, but really great mushrooms, super easy to grow, and more people should grow it because it's really, really approachable.
Okay, very cool. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fabulous tour, just walking through everything, just seeing how the whole expanding of the mycelium and then going ahead and inoculating the bags works, and then to see the end product, which is absolutely beautiful here. So thank you so much for sharing today. We really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, Michael, thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.